Hello Fanatics, I am Cindy and welcome to Diamond Painting Fanatics. I am back with my true crime episodes due to popular demand. I have been asked to do some more, so if you enjoy true crime and you enjoy diamond painting, please grab a project, come join me and we will discuss another true crime. Please consider hitting that subscribe button to join me on my true crime journey, and yeah, let's take a look at the project I'm going to be working on today and who we're going to be talking about. What bad person are we going to talk about this week? Stay tuned to find out. Today I want to talk about the Wanda Beach murders. Have you heard of this? This is a very, very sad story. I'm going to throw lots of names at you and I hope not to confuse it too much. But it's based on Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock. Let's start with Marianne. She arrived in Melbourne, Victoria, with her family from West Germany in September 1958. At the time, the family consisted of her parents, Helmut and Elizabeth, and her siblings, Helmut Jr., Peter, Trixie and Wolfgang. Another child, Norbert, was born the following year. After arriving in Australia, the family lived in a migrant hostel in New South Wales before settling in Temora. In 1963, the dad moved the family to Sydney after contracting Hodgkin's disease. The family found a home in West Ryde, and in June the next year, Marianne's dad passed away. Marianne's next door neighbour was Christine Sharrock, who lived with her grandparents Jim and Jeanette. Christine's father died in 1953 and her mother Beryl remarried and was living in southwestern Sydney suburb of Seven Hills. Christine moved in with her grandparents by choice, and when Marianne's family arrived next door, she developed a strong friendship with Marianne, who was the same age. I don't know why Christine chose to live with her grandparents and not her mum and stepdad. I don't know any of this. On the 1st of January 1965, at the height of the surf music era, Christine and Marianne visited the beach at Cronulla, which had been a popular picnic site for Marianne's family. Diary entries read after the murders indicated that the girls had kissed some boys at the beach this day. The following day, Marianne's family visited Cronulla Beach again without Christine. Meanwhile, Marianne's mum had been admitted to hospital for a major operation, leaving Helmut Jr. and Marianne in charge of the household. On Saturday the 9th of January, Marianne and Christine asked Marianne's mum, who was still in hospital, if they could take the younger children to Cronulla the next day, and were given permission. However, rain prevented the trip. On Monday the 11th of January, accompanied by Marianne's 4 youngest siblings, the girls again set off by train for Cronulla railway station after transferring at Redfern. They arrived at about 11 a.m. I know I was listening to a podcast on this story, hence I looked it up for myself, but it was a 2-hour train ride one way. So they arrived at about 11 a.m, but it was very windy and the beach was closed. If only they had turned round and come home. The group then walked down to the southern end of the beach and sheltered among the rocks. 8-year-old Wolfgang still wanted to swim, so Marianne went with him to a shallow part of the surf away from the rocks, and after they returned to the group they had a picnic. And at some point during this time, Christine left the others and went off by herself. When Christine returned to the group, they decided to go for a walk into the sandhills behind Wanda Beach at around 1 p.m. The group had reached a point round about 400 metres beyond the Wanda Surf Club, and they stopped to take shelter behind a sandhill as the younger children were complaining about the conditions. Marianne told her younger siblings that she and Christine would return to the rocky area at the south end of the beach where they had hidden their bags and return to fetch the children and head home. Instead, the girls continued. They were going the other way. They were continuing towards the sandhills. When Peter told them they were going the wrong way, they laughed and they walked on. The younger children remained waiting behind the sandhill until about 5 p.m, at which time they returned to collect their bags, including Marianne and Christine's purse, and went home on the last train, arriving home at around 8 p.m. Marianne and Christine were reported missing at 8:30 p.m. by Christine's grandmother. The next morning, on Tuesday the 12th of January, Peter Smith was walking 3 young nephews through the Wanda Beach sandhills. Some distance north of Wanda Surf Club, he discovered what appeared to be a store mannequin buried face down in the sand. He brushed away the sand from the head and realised that it was a body, and the police were called from the surf club. At this point, Smith believed he'd only found one young woman. When the scene was examined, Marianne was found lying on her right side with her left leg bent. Christine was face down with her head against the sole of Marianne's left foot. Both had scratch marks on their faces. From a 34-metre long drag mark leading to the scene, police determined that Christine had fled, possibly while Marianne was dying, only to have been caught, incapacitated and dragged back to the body of her friend. An intensive search was undertaken to find the murder weapons, a long knife and some sort of blunt instrument, but were never found. Tons of sand from around the murder scene were sifted through and various items were found, including a blood-stained knife blade, but police were unable to link it to the murders. The autopsy for Christine found a BAC of 0.015, but alcohol was not found in Marianne's autopsy. It was also discovered that Christine had consumed food, cabbage and celery, i.e. possibly a Chico roll, that was different from the rest of the party. It is suspected that this occurred while she was alone. Christine's skull had been fractured by a blow to the back of the head and she had been stabbed 14 times. Marianne's throat had been deeply slashed and she had been stabbed 6 times. The underwear had been cut and attempts had been made to rape both girls. Semen was found on both girls, but the autopsy showed that their hymens were intact. Mary Ann's brother Hans had viewed photos of her body and said, quote, "She'd been stabbed 25 to 30 times. She'd almost been decapitated because her throat had been cut so viciously." It was during Christine's absence that Wolfgang noticed a teenage boy hunting crabs. Later, he claimed to have seen the same boy twice more, once in the company of his sister and Christine, and again sometime much later walking alone. There has been doubt of his description of this person, as Wolfgang's testimony over time, it kept changing, basically. One minute he had a homemade spear gun, then he had a fishing knife, possibly both. The last official sighting of Mary Ann and Christine was around 12:45 by a local fireman, Dennis Dostine, who was walking in the area with his son and saw the girls walking about 730 metres north of the surf club. Dennis told police that they seemed to be hurrying, and one of the girls often looked behind her as if they were being followed. He did not see anybody else. There had been a number of people seen in the area who were never identified and never came forward. Their funerals were held on the 20th of January, and a £10,000 reward was posted in February, later converted to $20,000 in 1966, which stood unchanged as of August 2002. In April 1966, the coroner handed down his report, by which time police had interviewed some 7,000 people, making it the largest investigation in Australian history. Despite this, the murders quickly became a cold case, and none of the three main suspects, as we will talk about, fit the description of the surfer youth who has never been identified. The case was reopened in 2000, and in February 2012, the New South Wales Police Force's Cold Case Unit announced that a weak male DNA sample had been extracted from a pair of white shorts worn by Christine. While admitting that current technology was unable to provide more information, police were confident that future advances would give a lot more assistance. In July 2014, police said that a semen sample taken from Mary Ann's body had been lost and could not be located despite an extensive search. Johnson, a former detective who had investigated the murders, was given a painting in 1975 by Alan Bassett. Bassett had been jailed for murdering Caroline Orphan, a 19-year-old woman, on the night of Saturday the 11th of June in 1966, who was attacked, raped and strangled, then her skull crushed with a rock. On the night of her murder, Caroline Orphan went out for a night with her friends to the Iron Workers Club on Crown Street in Wollongong, where she met Bassett. Sent to prison for life, he served 29 years before being released in 1995. The painting, titled "A Bloody Awful Thing," quote, showed an abstract landscape. Johnson believed the painting showed blood trails, a broken knife blade, and the body of a victim, and became convinced that Bassett was the Wanda Beach killer. He also became convinced that it showed a scene from the murders that only the killer would know, as well as clues to the also unsolved murders of Kruger and Dowlinger. Again, we will refer to those. Despite the skepticism of other detectives, Johnson wrote a book about the case. Before it could be published, however, he was killed in an accident. Other detectives, while retaining professional respect for Johnson, concluded that he was wrong in his belief. One person Johnson convinced, however, was Daily Mirror crime reporter Bill Jenkins. Bill repeated Johnson's claims in his ghost-written memoirs, As Crime Goes By, devoting a whole chapter to the Wonder Beach murders. Most of the chapter was essentially a repeat of what he had written in his earlier book, but he mentioned Johnson, Bassett, and the painting as well. Bassett commenced proceedings for defamation in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which he was entitled to do after the attainder rule was abolished by the Felons Act in 1981. Although given his history of mental illness, the proceedings were commenced by the Protective Commissioner as his tutor. After a ruling on the form and capacity of the imputations, the publisher pleaded defences of justification, i.e. Bassett was a convicted murderer, and the proceedings never went further. Since his release, Bassett has voluntarily given DNA samples to clear his name, but whether or not he has been eliminated as a suspect by DNA has yet to be publicised. A second suspect is Christopher Wilder. 2 years prior to the Wonder Beach murders, he had been convicted of a gang rape on a Sydney beach, which led police to include him as a suspect. Wilder emigrated to the United States in 1969, where he embarked on a series of serial killings in the early 1980s. While visiting his parents in Australia in 1982, Wilder was charged with sexual offences against two 15-year-old girls whom he had forced to pose nude. He fled back to the US, and in the first half of 1984 he committed 8 murders and attempted several more. Wilder accidentally killed himself during a struggle with police in New Hampshire on the 13th of April 1984. Accidentally killed himself. A third suspect, not well publicised until 1998, is Derek Percy, who had been imprisoned since 1969 for the murder of a child on a beach in Victoria. Percy was considered too dangerous to be released and is the prime suspect for a number of other murders of children in Melbourne and Sydney, and he died in 2013 from cancer. He was considered a leading suspect for the Wonder Beach murders by the police. While Percy can be linked to the location on the date of the murders, there were no other links found. It was hoped he would make a confession on his deathbed, but those never came. Sounds like he fits the profile, but it's just circumstantial. Possible linked cases. 2 far less well-known murders also occurred during early 1966. In the days following the nationally publicised disappearance of the Beaumont children, which police at the time speculated might have been connected to the Wonder Beach killer. 1. On Saturday the 29th of January 1966, a 56-year-old cleaning lady named Wilhelmina Kruger was killed in the Piccadilly Centre on Crown Street in, I don't know how to say this, Wollongong. Her bloodied body was discovered around 5:45 a.m. at the foot of the basement level stairs by a butcher who had arrived for work. Having been first assaulted 3 floors above, probably around 4:30 a.m., she had been brutally dragged down the escalators and stairs. She was then strangled, stabbed, mutilated, and was found naked from the chest down. Police also found cigarette burns in her clothing, and blonde hair was found at the scene. In the time prior to the murder, Wilhelmina had become nervous that someone was watching her and had been driven to work by her partner. The lights in the car park within the centre had shown recent signs of tampering and had been tampered with again on the morning of the murder. A major clue claimed during the investigation, a witness who lived near the centre was waiting at the gate of his property for the morning newspaper to be delivered. He had reported seeing a vehicle speeding nearby at around 4:55 a.m. on the day of the murder. The witness described the vehicle as a rusty cream-coloured utility, possibly a Holden or Chevrolet type model, with a plywood canopy attached to the rear of the vehicle. The witness managed to give a description of the driver as a tall, lean male of a dishevelled appearance. This report corroborated by 2 couples visiting from Victoria who were staying at the Piccadilly Centre's motel, who asked a male about local accommodation shortly before Wilhelmina's murder. The group also stated that they heard the sound of a vehicle speeding away from the Piccadilly Centre shortly after the murder. The group's description of the male they spoke matched the witness's description of the male he saw speeding near the Piccadilly Centre shortly after Wilhelmina's murder. The couple also stated that he was driving a vehicle that also matched the witness's description of the vehicle. Considered one of the most brutal attacks in the history of the state, the case remains unsolved. Police believe that the murder might have been the work of the Wanda Beach killer, but would not say why. I'm guessing purely because they were very, very similar and brutal attacks. But it's good that they keep information to themselves so that only the killer knows. 2. Around midnight on Wednesday the 16th of February 1966, a 27-year-old shop assistant and prostitute from Bondi named Anna Dowlinger went missing after leaving the taxi club in King's Cross. 10 days later, at around 5:30 p.m. on the 26th of February, her 10 days later, oh my goodness, her semi-naked, strangled, stabbed and mutilated body was found by a truck driver who had stopped at the side of a certain road to change a tyre. Most of Anna's clothes and belongings were missing, and drag evidence showed that her body had been moved to a more visible location around 3 to 4 days prior to discovery. Police immediately linked her brutal Jack the Ripper-like murder, quote, with that of Wilhelmina, and investigators from that crime were called in to assist. They believed that the murder might have been the work of the Wanda Beach killer, primarily based on circumstantial evidence and similarities in the modus operandi, the MO of the killer. In both the murders of Wilhelmina and Anna, police believed that the killer was taunting them. In the Wilhelmina murder, a witness calling himself as Gary, quote, gave a statement that he and his girlfriend were sitting in his car parked in the railway square directly behind the Piccadilly Centre when he saw the utility pulling into the square sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m. on the morning of the murder. Gary, it's in quote marks, I don't think that's his real name, but Gary also stated that the vehicle circled Railway Square 3 times before turning back onto Gladstone Avenue and parking opposite the Piccadilly Centre. Police checks revealed that no such person existed on any record, and the address that Gary gave detectives was false. Why do people do that? The murders were the focus of an episode of Crime Investigation Australia entitled The Wanda Beach Murders / Beaumont Children Mystery. A book, Wanda, The Untold Story of the Wanda Beach Murders by Alan J. Wickater, was published in January 2003. January 2016 episode of Case File True Crime podcast. I think that's where I got it from. Not that I knew it was on Wikipedia, but I do have that podcast, and I was listening to, it's an Australian guy telling you, I don't think he went into as much detail as I have, especially with the 15-year-old. He goes through pretty much what I have from Wikipedia, but he goes a lot more in detail about the suspects and the murders of Wilhelmina and Anna, and how they are possibly linked to the Wanda Beach murders. But what is truly, truly sad about this story is they are 2 15-year-old girls, and they were murdered, brutally murdered, and it remains one of the most infamous unsolved Australian murder cases of the 1960s, and New South Wales' oldest unsolved homicide case. And I think it's truly, truly tragic, because there were so many people on the beach that day, and the detectives went to the scene, to try and work out if they were meeting up with someone, and get a feel for it. And he said, no matter how loudly them girls screamed, no one would have heard a thing, because they were so isolated in the area that they were murdered. And to have, I can't imagine being Christine. You're seeing your best friend get attacked by this guy. You make a run for it to go and get help, and you're caught up with. You know that's not going to end well. So that is the very, very sad story of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sherrock, and I hope justice comes for them one day. And whether it is one of these unsavoury characters from their suspicions of their prime suspects, if they can rule them out or give them a definite answer as to who done this. But I hope that they are resting in peace and they're not forgotten, because here I am bringing their case back to the forefront of people's minds. Someone somewhere must know something. Yeah. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really do appreciate it. And there's 4 very tragic cases. You have Marianne, you have Christine, Wilhelmina and Anna. All lost their lives and all unsolved. And I know some of you don't appreciate me bringing unsolved cases to your attention. You like the conclusion and the sentencing, but I thought it would be... I'm trying to be respectful and to bring this back up into 2021. And it's still unsolved. And the chances are it may remain that way for a long time. But hopefully not. Hopefully not. Someone somewhere knows something. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, and I shall see you in the next episode of our true crime. Maybe we'll solve it, maybe we won't. See you next week. Love, hugs and sparkles to you all. Bye.